What's going on, everyone? Welcome in, welcome in. What up, Roger? Appreciate it, bro. Welcome in, everyone. Welcome in. What a day. What up, Chris? Yo, Chicago just looks ugly. Yikes. How about them Vikings? Dude, the Bears literally have no offense. It's literally David Montgomery or nothing. That's insanely crazy. What up, Danny? Appreciate that, Roger. Definitely appreciate that. Futures are booming. I'm gonna give you guys a funny story, actually. I literally woke up this morning and looking at futures this morning, I was like, today's just gonna be like pretty much a washout. So I pretty much just scalped this morning for like I think 2 hours. I just made a quick 500 bucks and I'm like, you know what? Let me stop staring at the screen because everything just feels like it's moving so slow. And then that power hour rush was just so insane and I completely missed all of it because I didn't really get to look at the market in power hour. And now we just see futures just booming. So now you're like, damn, I wish I swung calls, right? It is what it is. And that's why, I mean, it's a short week. Don't try to push it too much. You know, there's always going to be another opportunity. Basically, we see futures are booming, but don't feel like you missed out on something. That's pretty much the message I'll get along there. So, you know, I didn't miss out on that power hour rush. I missed out on the gap up overnight. I actually had Facebook calls as well, pretty much, and I literally just missed that entire rip right into the close. So, it is what it is, but that just goes to say, you know, there's always going to be another opportunity yet again. All right. Those of you just joined in, welcome in, welcome in. Matthew, gap up and crap tomorrow. That's actually what I was about to get into. So nonetheless, what's going on, Randy? Let me actually just pretty much get into futures and to pretty much give you a breakdown of what I'm particularly seeing going into tomorrow and rather the rest of the week. But what I was actually particularly fond of was that we had this prior expanding, descending, broadening wedge that we had. I just extended the resistance line, and that was actually the spot where we particularly bounced off of the drop. So that was something that was pretty much encouraging. We bounced right where we were supposed to. And so that was a good sign for me. Now, this bounce seems a little bit early and a little bit extended for so early in the night here. And what that is leading me to believe here is that this is pretty much like a controlled drop. It's not a panic drop that we've had starting from last week. And what I would expect from that is that we're likely going to see a scenario where we get lower highs and lower lows going into what I would expect to be the Santa Claus rally next week. So this week to me is really going to be more so a very controlled downtrend in which you're likely going to see these little gap ups and then pretty much market hours are really going to be a bleed out. That's yet to be seen, but that's my assumption of what I'm expecting to look at. So if I'm really looking at where this gap up is going into particularly, as you see, it's in one of my zones here. We just crossed up above 45.81. So that put me right into my zone that I had here. That was a prior resistance support zone that we had before. So I see that we tested it a little bit a few minutes ago, and then we finally got that breakthrough. So I want to see us end up getting right above, once we get over 45.96, then we'll be out of that zone, and then we can end up testing this intermediate resistance that we have right around 46.21. And that'll be the spot where I'm particularly going to look to see if we're going to end up rejecting by morning. So 46.21 will be the spot that I look at in the morning. If we end up rejecting there, then that's where it comes into play where I say, you know, we're going to particularly look at lower highs and then lower lows because that 46.21 but would basically be a lower high that we're looking at. And then we get that next washout during the market hours tomorrow. That's what would be my assumption. Right now, we're very sensitive to the variant news. Any kind of headline surrounding that, we're very vulnerable to that. So that's what you want to keep in mind. I'm still hopeful that we get the Santa Claus rally next week. It usually happens after Christmas. So that's where my assumption is that we get this little controlled downtrend, and then next week we get that full little breakout here of this downtrend that's likely going to progress and will break out going into next week. So that would be my assumption here, but 46.21 is the big level that I want to see going into tomorrow morning if we end up breaking that level. Otherwise, again, as far as giving up, going back to the lows of what we had from today, we can end up giving back this entire gap up that we have overnight here. So that's something to keep in mind. But 46.21 is your high basically that I'm looking at. And then as far as your lows from today, in which we're going to give up this entire gap. All right, that's what I'll be looking at. As far as NASDAQ, a little bit of a similar scenario here. I'm actually right at one of my resistance points that we're still pretty much hanging around here. 15,761 on NASDAQ futures. We're literally right into that resistance. If we end up breaking that by morning here, then it's likely that that pushes up this gap up towards 15,873, and that'll be even a bigger gap up for NASDAQ. And of course, that'll be pretty much a very key level in which I want to see, okay, is that going to be where we end up giving up all of these points, all of this gap up that we have tonight, and that'll create our lower high for the next leg down. All right. So going into that again, I mean, right around where we are right now, this 15,754 level. And then if we continue the gap up here overnight, then I'm watching right around 15,873. That'll be where my key resistance is going into my zone here. As you see, this was a prior resistance support level on multiple locations. So that's what we want to see if we end up getting above that level, or if we end up projecting, that creates that higher low. Okay. So I'll look to see that. Just a few names that I'm pretty much just watching. Again, Facebook was one of the names that I actually particularly traded today. I just didn't. I pretty much was out of the market before that power hour rush. But overall, it was a good sign that I had today, and I'll pretty much show you what I was looking at intraday. But on a larger scale, we're looking at a massive megaphone, and then we have a little intra megaphone here as well on a smaller scale. Now going down to today's price action, in which I was really fond of, was this little bit of a falling wedge action. It was really low and tight here, and that's what I was watching for, of a little bit of an intraday breakout from that downtrend. But I was in right around on this pullback right here and wanted to see a next leg up to test our resistance as we started to get really tight. And it ended up that I got out right on the wick here at the top, and I didn't hold long enough. I could end up getting a bigger gain out of that right into the power hour. And as you see, we pretty much just had consecutive green candles right into that power hour into the close, and that was just a beautiful move. But that was what I was watching for. That's what I was particularly hoping to play out for, not just getting a quick buck out of the wick. But I did exit out before that rush hour move into the close. And so we'll look to see if we get a continuation. We'll get a little bit of a resistance right around this area of 326, which, if I'm not mistaken, after hours, we're pushing right over 327. So we already did break that little soft resistance, and then we're playing right now towards testing the gap fill, in which we'll test that at 329.90. So once we break over that 329.90 tomorrow morning, it's likely that we could get a quick push, maybe even see rapids out of this one because this one's very oversold. We'll see a nice strong push out of this one if that gap up holds by tomorrow morning, and that can end up pushing us right over into the gap fill. And that's what I'll be watching for tomorrow on this one. Another one that pretty much sets up beautifully as far as being very oversold in the sense that we haven't really heard from these names. Facebook, as you know, has really been beaten up. Another name was Netflix. Since we hit, I believe it was around that 700 mark that we hit, we haven't heard from Netflix at all. And today it actually benefited not so much just because it's oversold, but also because it's once upon a time it was a stay-at-home stock. So that's also something that's now trending, as you saw today with Zoom and all the other names, other worlds that stay-home stocks. But what I'm particularly looking at this one is a solidified downtrend. So I'm looking to see if we end up getting that breakout. It's actually just above that trendline resistance after hours. So I want to see that hold, and I can see a strong push towards 625, and that'll be a beautiful one that I watch particularly tomorrow. It was up about 11 to $12 at one point today, despite the market weakness. So if we end up getting that gap up tomorrow morning and this ends up holding, then we'll see this one get a nice strong push towards 625, and I will look to see if this one actually has continued strength in the morning. Again, that was literally while we saw tech pretty much just bleeding out today. Netflix was the one name that was actually holding up, being that it was a stay-at-home stock. So keep an eye on this one, even despite if the market starts to pretty much decelerate tomorrow morning off of this gap up. Keep an eye on Netflix, more so than Facebook actually. All right. The other one was Amazon. I know that we actually had an unusual call today on Amazon as well. It was about 33.50 that the unusual called out. keep in mind that actually did hit after hours. So that was a beautiful one. If you played that unusual and you held it overnight here, that was literally textbook. Of course, if you're holding that one, and I know, with today's price action, basically, they'd have probably destroyed you if you went out far out of the money. So it had a little bit of a risk to it, but it was a beautiful one. It hit that gap. We'll see if it holds by morning. If we're able to get over 33.73 tomorrow morning, then we'll likely see if we can get towards what I have here, 33.95, and then pushing over to 34.10. Those are the two next levels that I'm watching off of Amazon. Of course, that gap up would need to hold, and we'll need to see a little bit of a continuation and NASDAQ holding up for that to happen. All right, but as of right now, the gap is in play here, and that ends at 33.73. So keep that number in mind. All right. Three other ones here. Tesla. I just wanted to point out Tesla and pretty much how I ended up playing it. If I were to give you my top target here as far as the upside range, which I really doubt it at this point, but I'm really watching is right around the 958 level. That's the range that I'm watching. If we can get a strong push out of this one tomorrow, and Nasdaq continues to push as we see it. But what stood out to me today is that we had Nasdaq down so much, and even when we bounced, we didn't see any kind of life out of Tesla today. And that's really what it was about. And so I didn't like that from Tesla. When we saw that bounce, we didn't see any kind of life out of Tesla. So it does show relative weakness out of this. And that's what I don't want to end up continuing to see, is that weakness. So if it does show that tomorrow on this gap up, that may be one that I end up particularly shorting, and I'll keep an eye on that one for the downside. So, but other than that, I was pretty much just watching that opening 5-minute candle here, looking at the resistance, looking at the support. As you saw, it wicked above that candle, but it couldn't hold, and so that pretty much signaled the weakness to me, and you saw that flush out. And actually, once it ended up pretty much down here below that 5-minute candle, and I saw that NASDAQ was really showing some kind of life and it was bouncing, that's when I realized that this would particularly get a dead cat bounce. And I also did scalp calls on this one. So it was fairly easy today. The only thing again is keep in mind it did show a lot of weakness despite the bounce that we had going into the market close here. So that's something to keep in mind, that if not relatively showing any kind of relative strength out of the move that we saw, the release that we saw today. So that's something to keep in mind. Looking at two other names real quick is just NVIDIA and AMD. We saw what Micron earnings did. They're up about $5. So I'm just going to keep an eye on NVIDIA. You have on the 1 hour here, you have this little falling wedge action. I'll keep an eye to see if this one gets a continuation off of the after hours price action that we have. And so targets that I'm looking at is 288. Above 288, then I'm looking around 296 on this one as well. So I'll keep an eye on that one. And then also AMD was the other one that I wanted to see. And I'm pretty light on this one as far as really on my watch list. It's pretty much not near the top. But more so, I just want to see if this ends up playing out to be an inverted head and shoulders. You have this left shoulder, inverted head, and we'll see if we get a beautiful little continuation off of this right shoulder, in which we can trend towards the neckline here of 146 to 147. That's what I'll be watching out of those two. But other than that, I'll look at two quick tickers, and then we'll likely call it a night, see what the market does tomorrow. But I gave you some of my scenario of what I expect is lower highs, lower lows, and we'll see how that ends up playing out then, alright? Let me see real quick. One other thing. Let's see what you guys are looking at. Alright, so I'll look at Oracle and then I'll look at ARK. Those will probably be the two that I look at. Let's see. Ooh, Oracle. Ouch. Okay, so this is pretty much just in two ranges here. And literally, you're boxed in basically. And so I wouldn't even need to draw a line. Either you're going to end up completing this gap fill down below. And this is where the gap up that you end up having any after hours action that you're going to see that's going to likely gap this up could end up being a dead cat bounce, and we complete the gap fill below near 89.99. Otherwise, you're going to end up pushing. You are going to have a little bit of a resistance right around this range here of 96 if we end up continuing to get the push. The only other thing is that you did have a prior gap, so that may end up also being another resistance level here, in which that gap up will likely conclude right around 94.27 will be a hard resistance. So keep that level in mind, 94.27. If you end up projecting there, then it's likely that you have the gap fill completed to the downside. So keep that in mind. The other one that someone mentioned was looking at ARK. Let me take a look at ARK real quick. I did see actual calls on ARK. If I'm not mistaken, we actually had flow on ARK today as well. We had 96 calls, unusual calls coming through today for this week. So that was actually one that I do like for the upside. I was looking at the chart. It does look pretty beat up. The other thing is you also do have a little bit of a gap fill right here. So that will come into play with that unusual call as well. So I do like this one for the upside here. Near term, I mean, not to necessarily go long. It may particularly actually just be a day trade. So keep that in mind. But you do have beautiful upside here for that move right into that gap fill right there, into the 96 range before we possibly see further downside, given if the market does trend down as I expect with the lower highs, lower lows. But that'll be a beautiful one. Other than that, we'll see pretty much again if the market holds this gap. That's going to be the most important thing tomorrow. If that is the case, then you want to see the names that really showed strength today, given the fact that you pretty much saw what Netflix did, what the stay-at-home stocks did today. Look for those kind of names, and then also take advantage of the fact that if you end up seeing that, really go for the names that show the weakness if you're trying to get the reversal back to the downside. Like for instance, like we saw with Apple, pretty much holding down for just a bit. We saw Tesla really showing a lot of weakness. So keep those names in mind once you see the reversal to the downside. That's what I will say. All right. Other than that, pretty much my top two watches will more so be Netflix and Facebook, just because of how quiet those names have been and how oversold they are. Also, those are the two that I like to set up more so the best. And then of course any kind of sympathy towards Micron's earnings today. We'll see if the tech sector really holds up tomorrow. All right. But I think that'll pretty much call it a night here, guys. Again, it's a short week. Don't try to go far on the money because theta will destroy you guys. Because that will not be pretty on a short week. Theta will really pretty much destroy you. We had a lot of good plays. The Tesla puts I pretty much showed you once it ended up waking off that high of the 5 minute candle, opening 5 minute candle. That was a beautiful puts on Tesla Rapids. I pretty much called out that one, trying to say, get in over this price point on those Tesla Rapids. Also the Apple Rapids as well. That was a beautiful one. I pretty much was trying to say, get in under a certain point. Set the limit orders. Don't place market orders on Rapids. I think that's literally a no-no forever. Don't ever try to place a market order playing Rapids. It usually can easily backfire and you're not going to like the results of that. So that's something to keep in mind. We also did have, and this is actually names that I wasn't too fond of, but looking at unusuals on THC, they played the 70 calls that ended up paying out. Futu, that was a beautiful one as well. That ended up popping about $2 and change. Right after that unusual came out, that was a beautiful one. The Apple, we had a nice little Nimbus. I know that one had a little bit of a push intraday. We'll see if we get a continuation of this gap up, in which that'll likely be in play and it'll be in the money. And also the Macy's that we had today. That was also another beautiful runner. That actually squeezed beautifully right into the close. So that was another nice play as well. So let's see what they end up doing tomorrow if we get any continuations out of the unusuals. But that's when you see days like today, especially that the market's really bleeding. You see all this volatility. I usually say this, and I've probably heard me say it before. Don't try to enter place blindly, or just take a random call out from someone. Rather than doing that and pretty much setting yourself up for failure, or end up having to say, damn, I shouldn't have done that. I would rather you stick to the rapids or the unusual calls because those are my more higher probability plays. All right. So that'll be my message for you guys tonight. We'll see if the gap upholds again tomorrow. But other than that, we'll call it a night. Get some rest, and I'll see you guys bright and early tomorrow at market open. All right. You guys have a good night then. All right.